As we navigate the complexities of life, it's easy to get caught up in the pursuit of wealth and material possessions. But Scripture reminds us that there's a different kind of treasure that truly matters. Godliness with contentment is great gain. 1 Timothy 6:6. This timeless truth has been a cornerstone of Christian teaching for centuries, yet its relevance remains as fresh today as ever. For many of us, the idea of being content in our circumstances may seem like an unattainable goal. We're constantly bombarded with messages telling us to strive for more, whether it's wealth, status, or power. But what if we've been looking at this from the wrong perspective? What if true fulfillment and happiness aren't found in accumulating possessions, but rather in cultivating a deep sense of inner peace and contentment? The Bible has much to say on this subject, offering guidance on how to cultivate godliness with contentment as a way of life. Through the teachings of Paul and other apostles, we can learn how to reframe our priorities, letting go of worldly desires and instead focusing on what truly matters, our relationship with God. As we delve into this topic, we'll explore the biblical concept of godliness with contentment is great gain. We'll examine the scriptural foundations for this idea and explore practical applications for living out this truth in everyday life. Our goal is to help you cultivate a deeper sense of peace and contentment, regardless of your circumstances. So let's begin our journey together, exploring what it means to live with godliness and contentment as our guiding principles. May the wisdom of Scripture guide us as we seek to apply these timeless truths in our own lives. Biblical context and key passages when it comes to understanding the concept of godliness with contentment being great gain. We need to look at the biblical context in which this idea is presented. In 1 Timothy 6:10, Paul emphasizes that true wealth lies not in accumulating riches, but in living a life of godliness and contentment. One key passage that highlights the importance of contentment is Philippians 4:11-13, where Paul writes about his ability to be content regardless of his circumstances. He shares with us how he learned to be satisfied with what he had, even when he faced challenging situations. This passage encourages us to reevaluate our priorities and focus on cultivating a sense of inner peace. In the book of Hebrews, we find a similar theme in chapter 13:5-6, where it says, "Be content with what you have." These words remind us that true happiness and fulfillment come from within and are not dependent on external circumstances. This biblical perspective challenges us to reframe our understanding of wealth and success. Another key passage that supports the idea of godliness with contentment being great gain is 1 Timothy 6:17-19, where Paul advises believers to focus on what truly matters in life, their relationship with God. He cautions against the dangers of greed and materialism, encouraging us instead to prioritize spiritual wealth. Scripture reminds us that true wealth lies not in accumulating riches, but in living a life of godliness and contentment. 1 Timothy 6:10. We can learn from Paul's example of being content regardless of his circumstances. Philippians 4:11-13. Meaning and key themes in the context of Christian teaching. Godliness with contentment is great gain refers to the idea that living a life of spiritual wealth and inner peace is far more valuable than accumulating material possessions. This concept is rooted in the biblical principle that true fulfillment and happiness come from our relationship with God. At its core, this idea challenges us to reframe our priorities and focus on what truly matters, cultivating a deep sense of contentment and godliness. It's not about being wealthy or successful by worldly standards, but rather about living a life that is pleasing to God. The concept of godliness with contentment is great gain has several key themes. First, it emphasizes the importance of spiritual wealth over material possessions. Second, it highlights the need for inner peace and contentment in our lives. Third, It encourages us to reevaluate our priorities and focus on what truly matters. By living out this truth, we can experience a sense of fulfillment and happiness that is not dependent on external circumstances. This idea also has implications for how we view wealth and success. Rather than defining these terms solely in terms of material possessions or wealth, we must consider the role that our relationship with God plays in determining true fulfillment. By prioritizing spiritual growth and development, we can experience a sense of contentment and peace that goes beyond what we have accumulated. Ultimately, godliness with contentment is great gain is not just a theoretical concept. It's a practical way of living that has the power to transform our lives. As we delve deeper into this topic, we'll explore the scriptural foundations for this idea and examine how it can be applied in everyday life. Practical application today. So, what does it mean to live out the concept of godliness with contentment is great gain in our daily lives? How can we prioritize spiritual wealth over material possessions and cultivate a sense of inner peace? Firstly, we must be intentional about cultivating a deeper relationship with God. This means setting aside time for prayer, Bible study, and worship, prioritizing these activities above other things that compete for our attention. Secondly, we need to reevaluate our priorities and focus on what truly matters in life. Rather than being driven by external pressures or societal expectations, we must listen to the still small voice of God's Spirit within us. Thirdly, we must learn to be content with what we have, rather than constantly striving for more. This doesn't mean that we become complacent or apathetic about our circumstances, but rather that we find joy and satisfaction in the present moment. We can prioritize spiritual growth and development by setting aside time for prayer, Bible study, and worship. Reevaluating our priorities means listening to the still small voice of God's Spirit within us. In conclusion, as we've explored the concept of godliness with contentment is great gain, it's clear that this timeless truth has far-reaching implications for our lives. By prioritizing spiritual wealth over material possessions and cultivating a sense of inner peace, we can experience true fulfillment and happiness. The Bible reminds us that godliness with contentment is indeed a great gain. 1 Timothy 6:6. But what does this look like in practice? It means being intentional about our relationship with God, reevaluating our priorities, and learning to be content with what we have. By living out these principles, we can find joy and satisfaction in the present moment. As we close our journey through this topic, remember that true wealth lies not in accumulating riches, but in living a life of godliness and contentment. May the wisdom of Scripture guide you as you seek to apply this truth in your own life. Be content with what you have. Hebrews 13:5